In August of 1856, two workmen clearing a cave in a limestone quarry in the Neander Valley, outside Dusseldorf, shoveled the floor of it over a cliff edge. In the rubble came bones, a skull cap with a heavy shelf over the eyes, some ribs, two thigh bones thicker than they should have been. The quarry owner assumed cave bear. He was wrong by an entire species. The bones went to a local schoolteacher who collected fossils. His name was Johann Karl Fuhlrott, and looking at that skull cap, he reached a conclusion that had nowhere to go in 1856. The bones were human, and they were not ours. 8 years later, an Irish geologist named William King gave that conclusion a name, Homo Neanderthalensis. It was the first time anyone had placed a second species inside our own genus, and the reaction from most of European science was that Fuhlrott had found a deformed Cossack. He had not. He had found the edge of something. More than a dozen names now sit inside the genus Homo, and specialists do not agree on how many of them are real. Some were named from a single jaw. One was named from a skull that spent 85 years hidden at the bottom of a well. One has never produced a bone at all. It exists only as a residue in the arithmetic of living genomes, and for 15 years nobody could say whose residue it was. In May of 2026, that changed. We are going to walk down through 10 of them, not as a family tree, because the family tree is the part that keeps breaking. We are going to walk down through them as 10 places where the record stops behaving, and we will notice something on the way. The further down we go, the harder it gets to say where one of these people ends and the next begins. There's a habit of asking what killed the others. It is the obvious question, and it produces obvious answers. Climate, competition, bad luck, us. Set it down for 20 minutes, because the evidence from the last 5 years keeps answering a different question, one nobody asked as loudly. Not what happened to them, how separate were they ever? Number 10. Homo Antecessor. In the summer of 1994, a team working the Gran Dolina cave in the Sierra de Atapuerca in northern Spain cut into a layer they had labeled TD6 and started pulling out human bone. By the end of the following season, they had close to 90 pieces from at least 6 individuals alongside 150 crude stone tools. The bones were somewhere between 770,000 and 950,000 years old, which made them the oldest humans then known in Western Europe. They also did not match anything. In 1997, José María Bermúdez de Castro and his colleagues published the assemblage in the journal Science and gave it a new species name, Homo Antecessor, and a job. Antecessor, they proposed, was the last common ancestor of Neanderthals and of us, the forking point. The one place on the diagram where the two lines separate. It held that job for 23 years. Then, in 2020, Frido Welker and a large team published something in the journal Nature that nobody could have run in 1997. They took a single antecessor molar and read the proteins still surviving in its enamel. Not DNA, which does not last that long in a Spanish cave. Proteins, shorter, cruder, tougher, and still carrying enough sequence to place a fossil on a tree. The protein said Antecessor was not the ancestor, it was a sister, a closely related lineage sitting just outside the branch that produced Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, near the fork, but not standing on it. An honest note here, because it matters for everything that follows, enamel proteins yield a handful of positions, not a genome. The 2020 result is a firm placement, not a photograph. The species is real, the bones are real. The job description was ours, and we were wrong about it, which is a mild version of a problem that gets much worse. Number 9, Homo Naledi. On the 13th of September, 2013, two recreational cavers named Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker squeezed down a vertical crack about 7.5 inches wide inside the Rising Star Cave system, northwest of Johannesburg. At the bottom of the chute was a chamber. The floor of the chamber was bone. More than 1,500 fossil specimens came out of that room, from at least 15 individuals. Lee Berger and his team published the species in 2015. Small brain, roughly a third the size of ours, curved fingers built for climbing, feet almost indistinguishable from our own. A body assembled from parts that were not supposed to occur together. Everyone assumed it was old. 2 million years, maybe more, the anatomy read that way. In 2017, Paul Dirks and colleagues published the dates in the journal eLife using 3 independent laboratories that were kept blind to each other's results. 236,000 to 335,000 years. That is not deep time. That is the same window in which the earliest members of our own species were walking around Africa. A creature with a brain the size of an orange was sharing a continent with people who looked like us. Berger's team went further. In 2023, they argued that Naledi deliberately buried its dead in that chamber and carved marks into the cave wall. That claim has not held up, and you should hold it loosely. The eLife reviewers found the evidence inadequate as presented. A rebuttal in the Journal of Human Evolution, led by Maria Martinon-Torres with Diego Garate, Andy Harries, and Michael Petraglia, argued there was no scientific support for either the burials or the engravings. A separate team could not reproduce the sediment analysis at all. The dates are solid, the story built on top of them is not. Those are two different things, and the difference is the whole discipline. Naledi, at least, left us a room full of bone. The next one left an island, and an argument that ran for a decade. Number 8. Homo Floresiensis. In September of 2003, a team excavating the floor of Liang Bua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores, working nearly 20 feet down, uncovered a skeleton. Adult, female, roughly 3.5 feet tall. A brain of about 400 cubic centimeters, which is chimpanzee territory. Peter Brown, Thomas Sutikna, Michael Morwood, and colleagues published it in Nature in 2004. The press called it the Hobbit within a week, and the discipline spent the next 10 years fighting about whether it was a species at all or a modern human with a pathology: microcephaly, cretinism, Down syndrome. Each proposal was tested. Each failed to explain the whole skeleton, particularly the wrist bones and the shoulder, which are shaped in a way no modern human developmental disorder produces. The other shock was the age. The original excavations suggested these people were alive as recently as 12,000 years ago, which would have put a second species of human on Flores while agriculture was starting elsewhere. In 2016, Sutikna and his team went back, opened new parts of the cave, and found that the sediment layers were not laid down evenly. The bones were sitting in a much older pedestal that later deposits had cut around. Published in Nature, the skeletal remains date between about 100,000 and 60,000 years. The stone tools run from about 190,000 down to 50,000. The Hobbit got older and, in a strange way, more plausible. 60,000 years is roughly when modern humans arrive in the region. We still have no ancient DNA from Flores. The heat and humidity destroy it. Everything we know about who these people were related to comes from the shape of bone. And the shape of bone is an argument, not a readout. And they were not the only small people on an island. Number 7. Homo Luzonensis. In 2007, Armand Salvador Mijares was digging in Calao Cave in northern Luzon in the Philippines and recovered a single-foot bone, a third metatarsal. Dated to 67,000 years, it became the earliest evidence of any human being in the Philippines. Over the following seasons, the same layer produced 12 more pieces: 7 teeth, 2 finger bones, a toe bone, another foot fragment, at least 3 individuals, one of them a child. In 2019, Florent Detroit and his colleagues published them in Nature as a new species, Homo Luzonensis. The reason is the mixture. The premolars have 3 roots, which is rare in modern humans and common in much older hominins. The molars are strikingly small. The finger and toe bones are curved in a way that reads as climbing, closer to Australopithecus than to us. And Australopithecus never left Africa. Luzon has never been connected to the mainland by a land bridge. Whoever these people were, their ancestors crossed open water to get there. The entire species is 13 bones and teeth. No skull, no DNA, no jaw beyond the teeth themselves. Several researchers have said plainly that the sample is too small to carry a species name. That what Detroit's team has is a population with unusual anatomy, not a demonstrated species. That objection has never been resolved, and it will not be resolved by argument. It will be resolved by more digging or not at all. 13 bones, one species, hold that ratio, but hold on to the island for a moment. Because at the same time Luzonensis was on Luzon, a much older kind of human was still alive about 1,500 miles to the south, and that one is going to matter more than it looks like it should. Number 6. Homo Erectus. Between 1931 and 1933, a Dutch geological survey working a terrace above the Solo River near the village of Ngandong in central Java dug out a bone bed. 12 skull caps and 2 shin bones came out of it, all belonging to Homo erectus, the species that walked out of Africa nearly 2 million years earlier and spread further than any human before us. The Ngandong skulls are the most recent Homo erectus fossils ever found anywhere. The problem was that nobody could date them. Attempts over the decades produced answers ranging from 27,000 years to 500,000. A spread so wide it was useless, caused by uncertainty about exactly where in the terrace the fossils came from and by uranium leaching out of the bone. In 2019, Jan Rizal of the Bandung Institute of Technology and a large international team published a resolution in Nature. They went back and physically relocated the original 1930s excavation area, dated the river terrace itself rather than the bones, and pushed 52 radiometric age estimates through a single model. One chronology for the region, the valley, and the individual bone bed at once. 117,000 to 108,000 years ago. That is a date, not a guess, though it is worth saying that it dates the terrace and the bone bed, not each individual skull, and the fossils themselves were dug out 90 years ago by people who were not recording position the way we would now. Erectus was still alive on Java roughly 100,000 years after our own species appeared in Africa. It had by then been on Earth for close to 2 million years, across 3 continents, through repeated ice ages, using essentially the same toolkit. Nothing else in our genus has come close to that run. We are about 300,000 years into ours. We file Erectus under primitive. 2 million years disagrees. Remember that date? We are going to come back to Homo erectus at the very end, and it will not be the same species it appears to be right now. Number 5. The Denisovans, at some point before 2008, a fishing crew working the Penghu Channel off the west coast of Taiwan, hauled up a heavy human lower jaw in a dredging net 80 feet under the sea. It went to a local antique shop. It sat there. We made a whole episode about these people, so we will keep this short and point back to it. What matters here is the map, and that jaw is one corner of it. A single fingertip bone from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains, sequenced in 2010, gave us a genome before it gave us a face. That is the wrong order. Every other human species on this list was found as a shape and interrogated afterwards. This one arrived as a data file. For 9 years, that was almost all there was: a genome, a few teeth, and a population that plainly existed because it is written into living people from Southeast Asia to Melanesia. Then the fossils started arriving from everywhere at once. 2019, Fahu Chen, Frito Welker, and colleagues published a jawbone from Baixia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau in Nature, identified as Denisovan by its proteins, at least 160,000 years old, sitting at more than 10,000 feet. 2022, Fabrice Demeter and colleagues published a molar from a cave in northern Laos in Nature Communications. 2025, Takumi Tsutaya and colleagues published that dredged Taiwanese jaw in Science and identified it by protein sequence as a male Denisovan, Siberia, Tibet, Laos, Taiwan, frozen highland, tropical lowland, and a coastline that is now under the sea. That is not a species with a homeland. That is a species with a continent, and one that handled 10,000 feet of altitude in tropical lowland with equal success, which is a range modern humans took a great deal longer to manage. And from all of it, not one skull. We could map where they lived and not say what they looked like, which is why the next one broke something. Number 4. Homo Neanderthalensis. In a rock shelter called Grotte Mandrin, overlooking the Rhône Valley in southern France, a Neanderthal man died sometime between 50,000 and 42,000 years ago. Ludovic Slimac's team excavated him and gave him a nickname: Thorin. In 2024, they published his genome in the journal Cell Genomics, and it did not say what anyone expected. Start with what makes this species different. We know more about Neanderthals than about any other extinct human. Hundreds of individuals, dozens of genomes, tools, pigment hearths, healed injuries, a burial record that is genuinely a burial record. They are the control group for everything else on this list. So the interesting thing is no longer that they disappeared. It is how they were living just before. His genome diverged from other late European Neanderthals about 105,000 years ago. And after that, nothing, no gene flow in either direction, in a small population that stayed small. His lineage sat in southern France for roughly 50,000 years without exchanging a single detectable ancestor, with Neanderthal groups living within a few hundred miles of him. 50,000 years is longer than modern humans have been in Europe at all. They were neighbors, they behaved like strangers, they were not one dwindling people, they were pockets, and the pockets had stopped talking. The caveat is real. This is one high-coverage genome, and one individual cannot describe a continent, but it reframes the ending. We keep looking for the thing that killed the Neanderthals. Thorin suggests part of the answer is that by the end, there was no such thing as the Neanderthals, just small groups, isolated long enough that a bad century in one valley took a lineage with it. Now to the skull and the well. Number 3. Homo Longi. In 1933, a Chinese laborer working on a bridge over the Songhua River at Harbin in northeast China, under Japanese occupation, found a massive human skull. He did not hand it over. He wrapped it and dropped it down an abandoned well outside his house. and it stayed there while the occupation ended, while a civil war ran through the country, and while 3 generations of his family said nothing about it. He told them on his deathbed. In 2018, his grandsons pulled it out of the well and gave it to Hebei University, 85 years underground, and it is one of the best preserved archaic human skulls ever recovered. Enormous, a brain case in modern human range, with a brow ridge like a shelf and an eye socket almost square, at least 146,000 years old. In 2021, Qiangji Sijun Ni and colleagues published it in the journal The Innovation and named a new species, Homo Longi, Dragon Man. After the Heilongjiang province where it was found, they argued it was closer to us than Neanderthals are. That name lasted 4 years. In June of 2025, 2 papers came out on the same day from Qiaomei Fu's laboratory in Beijing. The first in Science recovered 95 proteins from the skull's bone, 3 of them carrying variants known from Denisovans, and placed the Harbin individual with the original Denisovan finger bone from Siberia. The second, in Cell, pulled Denisovan mitochondrial DNA out of the hardened plaque on its teeth. The dental calculus, the one part of a skull nobody bothers to clean off. Harbin is a Denisovan. After 15 years of a genome without a face, the face had been sitting in a well. And the price of that answer was a species. Homo Longi was named on real evidence, described carefully, published properly, and the molecules dissolved it. Whether the name survives as a label for a Denisovan group is still being argued, which raises an uncomfortable question about the names further down the list. Number 2. Homo Joloensis. In 2024, Christopher Bay of the University of Hawaii and Xu Wu of the Chinese Academy of Sciences published a paper in Nature Communications proposing a new species for Eastern Asia. Homo Joloensis, big head from the Chinese for large head. Skulls with cranial capacities above 1,600 cubic centimeters, larger than the modern human average. What makes this one different from every other entry is that they did not dig anything up. The fossils were already in the drawers. Shujiao in northern China excavated in the 1970s. Zhuchang excavated in 2007 and 2008. Material that had sat for decades labeled with the useless phrases the field falls back on. Archaic Homo sapiens, Middle Pleistocene hominin. Transitional Bay and Wu argued that a coherent group had been hiding inside that filing. They went further, and this is where it gets contentious. They suggested the Denisovans belong inside Homo Joloensis, not a sister group, the same species under an older available name. Most of the field has not accepted that, and Bay has been notably straightforward about it, describing the proposal as a hypothesis put up to be tested rather than a settled result. There is no ancient DNA from Shujiao. The argument rests on tooth and jaw morphology, but notice what it means either way. If Bay and Wu are right, a species can be created without a single new fossil, purely by rereading what was already in storage. If they are wrong, then the drawers still contain something we have not correctly named. Both versions say the same thing about us. We are not discovering these boundaries. We are drawing them. Which brings us to the one that has no bones at all. Number 1, the ghost. In 2010, Svante Pabo's group at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig published the first Denisovan genome. 4 years later, K. Proofer and colleagues published a high-quality Neanderthal genome in Nature and set all 3 sequences side by side. Neanderthal, Denisovan, modern human. There was something in the Denisovan that did not belong. A fraction of it, their estimate ran from 0.5% to 8%, came from a population that had split off from everybody else more than 1 million years earlier. Not Neanderthal, not modern human, not Denisovan. Something older that had been apart for a very long time and then at some point was not apart. Population geneticists call this a ghost lineage. It is a population we can prove existed without possessing a single fragment of it. We find it the way astronomers found Neptune, not by seeing it, but because the numbers will not close without it. In February of 2020, Alan Rogers, Nathan Harris, and Alan Achenbach published the sharpest reconstruction of it in Science Advances. Their model put the split at roughly 2 million years ago and the interbreeding event at around 700,000 years ago, the earliest known interbreeding between any 2 human populations. They estimated the ghost population at somewhere between 20 and 50,000 individuals, large, successful, present in Eurasia for a very long time, and completely anonymous. For 15 years, the most honest thing anyone could say was, there was somebody else here, we do not know who, and a piece of them is in living people today. On the 13th of May, 2026, Nature published a paper by Zhao Tianfeng, Qiaomei Fu, and colleagues at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. They had extracted enamel proteins from 6 Homo erectus teeth, 5 men and 1 woman from 3 sites in China: Zhoukoudian near Beijing, Hexian in Anhui Province, Sunjiadong in Henan, all 3 around 400,000 years old. All 6 teeth shared 2 variants in the same enamel protein. The first, they report, has never been seen in any human or any primate, not in Erectus from Georgia, not in Antecessor from Spain, not in Neanderthals, not in Denisovans, not in us. The second variant had been seen before it is in the Denisovans, and from the Denisovans it passed into living people. In the Philippines, the underlying gene variant turns up at a frequency of about 21%. Roughly 1 copy in 5. The author's conclusion is careful, and it should be quoted carefully. The super-archaic DNA in the Denisovan genome, they write, is likely to have originated from Homo erectus. The ghost may be Peking man. Sit with the shape of that. The oldest and most successful human species there has ever been the one we filed under primitive, the one on the wall chart with the sloping forehead and the spear, did not simply die out and get replaced. It appears to have contributed DNA to the Denisovans, who contributed it to modern humans, who are carrying it right now in Manila. And here's the part this channel cannot leave alone. The Zhoukoudian fossils that made Homo erectus famous, the Peking man skulls excavated between 1927 and 1937, do not exist. In December of 1941, as Japanese forces closed on Beijing, they were packed into 2 footlockers for evacuation to the United States, and they vanished. Every theory since is a rumor. They have never been recovered. The tooth in the 2026 paper is not one of them. It is catalogued as PA69, and it was found at Zhoukoudian between 1949 and 1951, when Chinese teams went back into a site that had already been stripped and emptied and looted and kept digging anyway. The single most important molecular result about Homo erectus in a century came out of a tooth that only exists because somebody excavated the same cave twice. And this is one paper on 6 teeth from 3 sites, using a method that reads a few dozen positions rather than a genome. It is a candidate source, not a closed case, and the authors say so. It needs to run on erectus material from other regions and other periods before anyone should call it settled. But it is the first time the ghost has had a name proposed for it at all. So, 10 species and only 1 of them left. That is what the title says, and it is true, in the way a headline is true. The record says something less tidy. Antecessor was demoted from ancestor to cousin by a molar. Naledi's dates hold, and its story does not. Floresiensis got older. Luzonensis is 13 bones. Erectus outlived every question we asked about it. The Denisovans turned out to be 4 countries and a seabed. The Neanderthals ended as pockets that had stopped talking to each other. Homo Longi was named and then absorbed. Joloensis was assembled out of a filing cabinet, and the oldest presence of all left no bones whatsoever, only a signal in living blood, and a tentative match to the people from the cave near Beijing. 10 separate species is a story we can hold in one hand. It is also, increasingly, not what the evidence looks like. What the evidence looks like is a braided river. Channels that separate for 100,000 years, run alone and rejoin. Populations isolated long enough to look like different kinds of people. Meeting again often enough that the difference never finished. We did not win. That framing needs to go. What happened is that all the other channels ran dry, and the one still moving is carrying water from every one of them. Denisovan altitude genes in Tibet, Neanderthal immune variants across Eurasia, and if the 2026 result holds, a fragment of Homo erectus surfacing in 1 gene copy in 5 across the Philippines. They are not gone in the way that a burned library is gone. They are gone in the way a language is gone when the last speakers marry into the village next door. The words survive, unrecognized, in what everybody says. You are the last one standing, you are also the only one still carrying them. That is why the skull in the well matters and the tooth from the twice-dug cave. Not because they filled in a chart, because every one of these people was proved by an object somebody nearly did not keep. If you want to see more of what the record keeps hidden, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.